Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Want to make sure that we respect everybody's time, and since we do have a city commission meeting at 6 o'clock, or 7 o'clock, this starts at 6, thank you, Sam. Want to make sure that we start and have an opportunity for our presentation and question and answer prior to the beginning of the city commission meeting. So for those of you just coming in, if you can grab a seat and we can get started here in just a second. All righty. Well, again, welcome to our presentation this evening on a proposed Ann Arbor to Traverse City commuter train. I think some of you may have heard about this through various channels in the media and elsewhere over the last several months. And I just wanted to mention that there's also been some talk locally about a shuttle train that you may have read in the newspaper that would be from the south end of Mount Pleasant to the north end of Mount Pleasant or vice versa. This is not that. So if you're here to hear more about that, you're more than welcome to stay here, but we're not going to cover that topic this evening. But instead a larger project that involves rail transportation that could have a significant impact on Mount Pleasant and the community. My name is Bill Merdeza. I'm the Community Services Division Director here with the City of Mount Pleasant. And we have been contacted by, at the time, the Michigan Land Use Institute to ascertain our interest in participating or supporting investigations into the possibility of a commuter train from Ann Arbor to Traverse City. Since that time, the Michigan Land Use Institute went through a change in their name, and they are now known as the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, located in Traverse City. This evening, I have with us Jim Buchbauer. He's the policy specialist for the Groundwork Center, which is a nonprofit local food, transportation, and clean energy advocacy organization. He's leading a project that explores what it would take to establish passenger rail service on an existing state-owned set of railroad tracks between Ann Arbor and Traverse City. So again, Jim, without further ado, I will let him get into his presentation, and then afterwards I'm sure he would be welcoming any comments or questions that you might have regarding the proposed project. So, Jim?
Great, thank you, Bill. And yes, I would actually love to hear feedback, questions, concerns. I mean, and that's really the point of me coming down here, is to engage you all and get some feedback from you all on this idea. We're just launching this idea. There are still a lot of questions we need to answer, so that's why I'm here, still trying to work in some of the communities and hear some of the feedback. But I'll start off by saying that this is a very exciting time for trains in Michigan. We're advancing more passenger rail projects than almost every other country in the nation right now. And if you just consider with me a few examples, Detroit is building the state's first ever urban streetcar line, which is very significant. It's a $180 million project, a 3-mile streetcar line in downtown Detroit. Ann Arbor is building 2 commuter lines. One that's going to connect them to downtown Detroit, and another one that's going to connect them to the Howell-Brighton area. Major improvements are being made to the tracks between Chicago and Detroit that will allow trains to travel about 110 miles per hour on most of the corridor there, cutting down the travel time between those 2 cities by an hour. And right now the state is looking at the best way to connect Detroit to Ann Arbor, to Lansing, to Grand Rapids and Holland through a coast-to-coast project. They're exploring what's the best way we can connect these with passenger rail. And our goal at the Groundwork Center is to establish a passenger rail connection between Traverse City and Ann Arbor that would connect one of the fastest growing regions of the state to southeast Michigan and to these rail lines and rail projects downstate. We believe that this can happen within 10 years because of a unique set of circumstances that exists between this Traverse City and Ann Arbor corridor. Number one, the tracks are still in place and they're still owned by the state. And that's significant because one of the largest costs when you're taking on a major transportation project like this is purchasing the land and putting down the infrastructure. In this case, both of those things are already in place. And the tracks are actually in pretty good shape. Right now they're being leased by, most of the tracks are being leased by a company called Great Lakes Central. Great Lakes Central is shipping freight products in and out of northern Michigan to places all over the country. Mostly in the Traverse City area, it's wood products and plastic products, and you're seeing all those products come right through your downtown. For that reason, the tracks have been maintained over the past few decades, and a lot of that infrastructure, especially as you head south on the line, is still in really good shape. Passengers are allowed to travel on trains on a special event basis right now on this entire corridor. So that's significant. There's a lot of public support for this. In fact, there's a lot of enthusiasm. Back in 2011, the state went around to communities and asked them, what do you want to see with passenger rail? What communities would you like to travel to if we had a major passenger rail system in this state? And the number one priority that came out of that process was people wanted to see a rail connection to Traverse City. In fact, more people attended the Traverse City meeting than anywhere else around the state. So that support and that enthusiasm is what prompted the Michigan Department of Transportation to include this idea in their long-range plan that was created back in 2012, the following year. So what are the benefits to a project like this? Well, the first one is obvious. It would be another option for Michigan travelers to get around the state. When I talk about this idea to groups in Southeast Michigan and I ask them, how many people have a connection to the Traverse City, Petoskey area, about 85 to 90% of the hands will go up in the room. There's a lot of connection between the southern part of the state and northern Michigan, whether it's a tourist connection, family home, vacation home, a major sort of pure Michigan connection, I would say. So this would allow people in Southeast Michigan to go to Ann Arbor, jump on a train, and be able to be taken right up into downtown Traverse City, maybe stop at a few of the communities in between like Cadillac and Mount Pleasant. But once they're in Traverse City, they'd be able to get around the region through an interconnected network of what we envision, which would be a public transportation, ride share, car share, bike share. We feel that within a decade, a lot of these options will exist to get people to their final destination once they're in Traverse City. We also feel it would make Michigan more attractive to young people and talent. Last year, the Rockefeller Foundation did a major study on the preferences of young people and where they're traveling to. And that study found that 86% of young people are looking for public transportation, including rail, when they're looking for a place to live. So that was significant, and that's one of the reasons why the business community and the real estate communities, especially in Traverse City and Ann Arbor, are really interested in this idea. They're becoming very energized about this because they're seeing this project as a way to attract what I would say the next generation of workers who want to, say, live and thrive in Michigan without having to depend on a vehicle. So to them, this is significant. I'd like to tell the story of Rich Sheridan. Rich Sheridan owns a software development company in downtown Ann Arbor. He says the lack of a rail connection between places like Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids, and Ann Arbor and Mount Pleasant or Traverse City prevents him from expanding his business in these areas and prevents him from working with other tech companies in these areas because he simply can't take the time to jump into a car, deal with parking, and then getting around to the downtowns for some of these other communities. And he can't spend the time to go out to an airport and fly to another community and then get into the downtown. He needs a direct downtown to downtown connection where he can be working by himself or working with a team, so he's not having any lost time in his day. He says if he had those connections then, and he had an efficient rail connection, then he'd be able to do that. He's also attracting a lot of the workforce that I mentioned earlier. We're touring his office earlier this summer, and we had met a 22-year-old there who showed us his learner's permit. He was just learning how to drive, and it wasn't because of a financial or a physical disability or any reason. He simply lived in communities in other places where he didn't have to rely on a car to get around, and when he moved to Ann Arbor, he had to get a car. So he's attracting that next generation workforce, so he's a big advocate for this. We also feel it would have a major impact on some of the downtowns, not just in Traverse City or Ann Arbor, but places like Kingsley, Cadillac, Mount Pleasant, Owasso, Durand. What I would say some of the best downtowns in the entire country, as far as the building stock and the relation to the tracks and the rivers. A Grand Valley State University study done in 2009 showed that Michigan cities that had even just once a day train service had an extra boost to their downtown economies by up to $45 million. And that was back in 2009, before there was a huge boost in rail ridership in Michigan. So major impact on downtowns, more attractive for people, and just another option for getting around. This is in downtown Cadillac. That's Lake Cadillac right there. On the other side of this photograph is the buildings of downtown Cadillac, and this is likely an area where a train would stop. So a lot of things need to happen before there's full-blown passenger service. I don't expect you to see all the details on this timeline. We have some sheets in the back where you can take a look at it in more detail, but just know that there's a lot of studies that need to take place. The first one is a preliminary feasibility study. We are working with the Michigan Department of Transportation to hopefully get that study done next year. That study is going to start to answer a lot of the questions that are out there. How much would something like this cost? Where are some of the upgrades that need to take place on the tracks in order to get trains traveling up to 50, say 60 miles per hour? How many people would actually ride this? There's a lot of people that say, yeah, I'd love to take a train from this place to this place, but what does that really translate to when you're talking about the everyday travelers between a lot of these communities? And MDOT has very sophisticated models that they can use to estimate how many people would ride a service like this, depending on how fast it goes. It would also look at the potential operating structures for this. Should this be for-profit? Should this be a nonprofit that operates this? Is this an extension of Amtrak? All those things will be explored in this preliminary feasibility study that, again, we're trying to make happen next year. We are at the Groundwork Center responsible for the awareness building around this idea. We're trying to push this idea forward, and even though we don't have all the answers, the questions answered, we are trying to get them answered. And the reason for that is, we can do these studies, and a lot of times these studies end up sitting on a shelf unless there's real engagement from the public and unless there's real feedback given by the public. So when it comes time to engage the communities and ask for their feedback and input on this idea when the study takes place, we're really raising the awareness around this idea so that people do show up to these meetings. We kicked it off earlier this year at a big event at Traverse City State Theater. About 250 people showed up to hear about this idea. Again, there's a lot of interest from the community in Traverse City, and it was a wildly successful event, I would say. We had the former mayor of Ann Arbor, John Heifja, come up and talk about his vision that he had in Ann Arbor for connecting to Traverse City by train, and we had other rail experts come up to Traverse City and talk about this idea. Right after that meeting, we had a crowdfunding campaign where we asked people to come up with individual donations to help us create materials and help us just move this project along. And we ended up raising about $20,000 in just 2 weeks just from individual donations from people who really wanted to see this happen, and most of those were just from the Traverse City area. Met with civic leaders and groups, business groups, and different nonprofits and some of the communities along the line, and asked them for their feedback, and we're still in the process of doing that right now, and we're hearing just a lot of support. So another thing that I'm doing is going around and looking at other sort of startup train operations and learning how this can be done at a real cost-effective basis. And we're looking at places where they've used existing tracks and existing equipment to provide passenger service, whether it's commuter trains, long-distance trains, or even just shorter light rail systems. So I'm becoming sort of the rail expert in this area. What we hope to do between now and the next few years is to work with organizations like the Steam Railroading Institute, who some of you may know is the organization that runs these excursion trains or special event trains that sometimes go between here and Cadillac. We want to increase the frequency that we're running these excursion trains and hopefully over time build more and more excursion trains into more regular service, say every weekend or every weekend in the summer, and then over the next few years expand the amount of excursion trains that we're running, just so we can start building continue to build that interest and demand for the service. And then within a decade, we hope to expand that into full-blown passenger service. But still, we don't know what that would look like, whether that would be daily, where it starts, where it ends. Again, a lot of those questions will have to be answered through this feasibility study. So there's a unique set of circumstances here. We believe that we can advance a project that I think could be a model for other places around the country, and I think it would have huge benefits for downtown Mount Pleasant and the surrounding areas. And again, I'm looking for your feedback and questions and hopefully your support for us to move forward with getting some of these questions answered. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
I'll be bringing the microphone around.
Might be able to shout it.
Might as well stand up. I actually have several questions, but I'll ask them one at a time.
Sure.
This actually doesn't have a lot to do, or it does. I see that there is an extension into Detroit. There's also currently a Norfolk Southern rail line that runs right past Detroit Metro Airport. Has any thought been given to putting a rail station at Metro Airport, a world-class airport that could bring in people from all across the country, all across the United States, and then put them onto a train that could take them entirely across the state of Michigan and solve that last mile problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's the 24th largest airport in the entire world. And it still doesn't really have a viable rapid transit connection to any other place in the state. We unfortunately are not looking at that with this project. I'm looking at specifically Traverse City, Petoskey to Ann Arbor. And that line between Ann Arbor and Detroit is actually, I put that line on there because it represents the commuter line that's sort of in the planning stages right now and will hopefully be up and running within the next few years. But they're looking at that question, and I think they're taking that very seriously. That's a Southeast Michigan Council of Governments question. So unfortunately, yeah, I agree with you, but that's not something that I'm working on right now.
You pass through a number of universities as you go through this route, and they can be a great source of information that you can gather probably more efficiently and locally oriented. You're going through Alma, you're going through CMU, you're going through University of Michigan. What role do you see universities playing in helping you gather the information you need, either for the NEPA study or for whatever you're looking for information?
So I hope that there's a huge role, actually. Michigan Tech, and I know that's not along this line, that's in the Upper Peninsula, they have one of 5 rail programs, these very high-level rail programs in the entire country. And they have a lot of engineers there that go on to work at MDOT and especially their rail program. And so they would like to take a role, but we've been talking a little bit with the University of Michigan's Business School. I have met with the dean of the business school at CMU. I think there's an opportunity to provide some economic analysis, especially around some of the downtowns around the station. I think that would be very helpful. And I think that the colleges and universities could play a role in the study and the information gathering. I think that that's great, and it's a way to do it at a low-cost basis and efficiently. So we really do want to look at that. And while you're heading over there, I speak to the people at U of M and even other people at CMU, and they say, yeah, we would love to have some kind of another transportation connection between our two universities that would just expand our learning. We'd be able to work together a lot more, and I continue to hear that, so that's good.
Hi, I'm Mel Nyman. I'm the mayor of Alma, and I'm very pleased to be here to support this project. I know it's a long-range project, but I think it's a very important one for the state of Michigan generally, and since that track goes right through Alma, right across the Alma College campus, it's an obvious place where we could load students up and send them in either direction very easily and save them the bother of having to own a car on campus, incidentally. So I'm very supportive of this project, and I'm glad to see you working so hard on it.
Right. Thank you. Yes, we've heard college students say, this would open up the potential for us to visit larger metropolitan areas around the country, especially if we can connect to these other lines. But from a lot of U of M students and CMU students, we've heard, yeah, we'd go up to Petoskey and Traverse City so we can go to Boyne and go skiing in the winter, too.
Any more questions? Oh,
Lots of questions.
don't be shy. Raise your hand.
Wouldn't this be a job creator too?
Absolutely, yes. I think so. I hesitate to really estimate the amount of jobs that could be created by this without having that preliminary study done. But absolutely, I think so. Just not only in some of the construction, most of rail construction in Michigan comes from Michigan companies, including improving the tracks, laying down the ballast, which is what holds up the tracks, and a lot of ties are in Michigan, but also in the operations. I mean, whatever kind of operating structure exists would be an expansion on what exists right now, so that's new jobs.
Okay, the question I have, as I look at your slide, you've identified specific towns. Is this an anticipated stop points
So
or pickup points?
we put some of the larger communities on this map. This by no means signifies where the stops would be.
Okay.
No,
The
it's just
reason
way too
I'm
early.
asking is I'm from Clare.
Sure, I know. Yeah, we get asked by basically every community that's not mentioned on here why they're not mentioned, and it's only, yeah, I talked about this earlier with the Rotary Club. Lansing's not on here either, and that's where the two sort of purple lines intersect down there, and we had to balance creating a map where you would focus on the lines versus focusing on the white boxes with text. So it was sort of a design thing, but I could absolutely include Clare on a future map.
Could you address what needs to happen in order to make the feasibility study take place in 2016?
Sure. So the feasibility study will be funded through a federal grant, and it's a pot of money that's specifically sort of portioned off for transit studies, and it's about $100,000 to $120,000 study, where 80% of the funding will come from this federal grant, and I'm looking to the local communities between Traverse City and Ann Arbor, and including Traverse City and Ann Arbor, to come up with some of the matching funds for that if possible. So I'll be looking for first letters of support for the grant application from a lot of the communities and nonprofits and agencies all along this corridor, and also the statewide agencies. But also I'll be requesting some pretty modest, matching funds that will be split up between all of the communities along the line. And that grant application is due in February, so I'll be continuing the conversation with the Mount Pleasant community, and hopefully we have enough support here in this community, and I know we do in some of the other communities where if I were to make a request for a letter of support, that would be looked at favorably. So, and then the study would probably be announced in summer, and then it would kick off in late summer, early fall of 2016. Maybe we could kick it off with a train ride. Who knows? That would be great. We're talking to the Michigan Department of Transportation about that right now. If we could launch it during one of the festivals in Traverse City, that would be even better. So, yeah. It's the same study process that's being done right now with the Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, Grand Rapids, and Holland line, which is just concluding right now. So this project would be the next project that's evaluated.
You mentioned the infrastructure of the tracks are already in place and that the most expensive part is buying the land and laying down the railways. How much is the project expected to cost other than using the existing railways?
So that's a great question, and that's a question that we're going to begin to answer with this preliminary feasibility study, which again we hope to have done next year. Yeah, there are quite a few costs that we need to consider both in the infrastructure and then in operations, and those things will begin to be answered with this study.
Any other questions? Oh, couple up front.
Hi, my name is Damian Fisher. I'm a local attorney here in Mount Pleasant, specializing in community and economic development. My question is, what efforts are you doing to create these transportation authorities that can help you? Now, you've talked about meeting with a dean here and city council there, but at the end of the day, letters of support, yes. Matching contributions, yes. But at the end of the day, these things won't survive without an integration of this line in with public transportation in each and every one of these cities. And that's going to cross jurisdictional lines, it's going to cross business interests, and that's a parallel path that needs to be initiated right now as well when you're making those contacts. What kind of efforts are you doing in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as the transit agencies are concerned, I'm approaching each of the transit agencies and getting their feedback on the idea, and A, they've been very supportive, and B, we're talking about what the formal role will be for these agencies. In Traverse City, the Bay Area Transportation Authority is actually going to be the grant applicant for this feasibility study that we're conducting next year. So they're very supportive, and they are hoping that a piece of the study will evaluate, okay, so once people arrive in Traverse City, what's going to be our role as a public transportation provider within the Traverse City area? The Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority has also been a big supporter. We've been meeting with them quite frequently, and they see this as an extension of a commuter line that they're trying to build between Howell and Ann Arbor. So they've been very supportive and have offered technical expertise on their end. I haven't met as much with the transportation agencies between Traverse City and Ann Arbor, but I hope to. And on the question of what that authority would be, that's something that's going to come out in this study. And when they start to evaluate what's this operating structure going to look like, I mean, one of the potential operating structures would be a nonprofit that operates as a transportation authority, and the management board would be made up of interests all along the line, including the transportation authorities that exist. So there could be some other nonprofit that's created with the communities along this line that serves as that regional authority. But again, all that's going to be looked at in the study too.
I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, reaching out is good, and I hear you say chasing the grant dollars and having other municipalities apply for the grants too. I just want to point out, according to this map here, you've got 3 Indian tribes along this line. You got Sag Chips in Mount Pleasant, you got Grand Traverse Band, and you got the Little Traverse Band up in Petoskey. All those are conduits to federal dollars independent of any state or municipality here in Michigan. So great stakeholders to have at the table.
That's great. Thank you for that feedback. We've had the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians participating in this process. They've been attending every meeting we've had in Traverse City. They've identified a number of funding sources that they have access to that could go to improving some of the tracks in the Traverse City area, and they're willing to work with some of the other tribal communities as well. So that's great. That's a great point.
This gentleman kind of asked my question, but getting people to all of those cities by train is fairly easy. That's the easy part of it. But what if you let 100 people off in Mount Pleasant or Cadillac, then what happens to those 100 people? Have you looked into the taxis or the public transportation or rental car agency kind of businesses, or is that too far down the road?
Well, I was going to say, luckily we have some time to figure out some of those transportation solutions locally. You know, we know parking is going to be a need. We know that getting people from the train depots in some of these towns to hotels is going to be a need. People are going to want a car, perhaps, when they arrive in a city, so they can get, especially in Traverse City, where you're not necessarily just hanging out in downtown Traverse City. You want to visit some of the Great Lakes and waterfronts. And so how do people get around with their luggage? Those are all things that we have to look at. And, you know, transportation technology is changing with ride share, car share, and a lot of opportunities are starting to pop up, market opportunities to provide these solutions. And we think that that's going to continue. And luckily, you know, we're saying 10 years, so we've got some time to figure that out. But that's definitely something that needs to be part of the study. I noticed here there is some ample parking by what could be a potential train station in the future. In Traverse City, we don't really have those parking opportunities by our station. So, but all of that has to be evaluated for sure.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming this evening. There's
Great. Well, thank
information
you.
on the back table, and there's an email and mailing list sign up if you'd like some information down the road at the back of the room. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks.